Hi, this is Liz with Connecting Threads, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to sew blocks together into a finished quilt top. This tutorial will be relatively simple, as I'll be showing you how to line up all of your blocks and then prep them for sewing them all together. Now, if you're watching this, my guess is that you already have blocks ready for a quilt top. Today, I'm going to be using Sawtooth Stars and 9 patches, both of which we have full-length tutorials on our website. So if you are curious about how we got to this video, or you need some inspiration for creating blocks for a quilt top, both of those videos are available by clicking the links in the description below. I'll start by laying out all of my blocks in my preferred order, which you've noticed I've already done. If you have a scrappy quilt, this is a fantastic time to play around with placement. And that is one of the reasons why I'm using the portable design wall that we have right here. The fabric is made out of flannel, and quilting cotton has a tendency to cling to it. So you'll notice that all of these blocks are lined up here and none of them have pins in them. They're all just clinging directly to that flannel. So if I take this block off and then I pop it back on, boom, it clings directly to it. So this is a really great opportunity to play around with how you'd like all of your blocks to be laid out for your finished top. Now, the other thing that this portable design wall is really great for is just laying out blocks in general. This Sawtooth Star is a little bit different than your basic Sawtooth Star. All of the components around the outside are the same, but right here, the center square, I added this little outline right here in a light blue, just because I thought it added a little bit of a fun, exciting change to your basic Sawtooth Star. So I want to prep this for chain piecing, which means that I can use the portable design wall to lay out my block. You may have noticed that there is a Sawtooth Star missing here, and that is what we're going to do. I'm going to take all of the components of this block and lay them out and prep them for chain piecing. So I have my pieces right here, and I will start by laying out my corner squares, the backgrounds of my flying geese. Now, if you have something like a flying geese block that you need to prep, it can be a little bit difficult because you have these 2 points, which are separate fabric from your background. Now, what I like to do is, since these all need diagonal lines drawn on them, I will place them on my design wall. I will pop them right next to my sewing machine so that as I go through and do my chain piecing, I can get all of those flying geese prepped. So I will continue laying out the rest of this block, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew it together off screen. We will come back and I will talk you through how to get all of these blocks sewn together into your quilt top. Now that my final Sawtooth Star is done, this is my finished layout and I am ready to start sewing my blocks together. Now, my biggest tip for sewing blocks together is to avoid having to sew the longest edge of your quilt by focusing on smaller sections and smaller rows. So when looking at this quilt top, the shortest seam would be this horizontal one between rows. So what that means is there are only 3 blocks horizontally across, but there are 4 vertically, meaning that this horizontal seam is shorter than this vertical seam. So we are going to sew our quilt top in rows here so that the longest seam I have to sew is between multiple rows. We're going to start by taking our first Sawtooth Star right here, flipping it right sides together with our 9 patch, and then sewing these 2 blocks together. Now, when you are sewing blocks together, the other thing that's really important to remember here, you need to make sure that you match any intersecting lines. So these 2 blocks actually don't have intersecting lines, which makes it a little bit easier for me to sew. I'm gonna make sure that the ends match, and then I'm gonna make sure that any seams facing my sewing machine are pinned down. I'm gonna go ahead and take this to my sewing machine. I will get this sewn together and we'll move on to the next step. Now that these 2 blocks are sewn together, I'm gonna be taking my last Sawtooth Star and sewing it onto this middle 9 patch. Now, another tip that I have is when you are sewing your blocks together, make sure that you are pressing your seams towards the darker fabric. I have some white in my 9 patches here, and so if I had pressed my seam towards the 9 patch, you might have been able to see it through that white. So anytime that you have a lighter fabric over a darker fabric, always press that seam towards the darker fabric. Now let's go ahead and let's take this Sawtooth Star. We're going to flip it right sides together on top of our 9 patch. And then I will take this to the sewing machine and I will finish up this first row. Now we have our first row finished. My next tip for any sort of sewing, but especially for your quilt tops, chain piece where you can. Assembly line sewing is going to end up saving you a lot of time. So what I like to do is, especially once I have all of this laid out on something like a design wall, I'm going to take every single one of my pieces on this side. I'm going to flip them all right sides together with their middle counterparts, and I'm going to take them all over to my sewing machine in a stack. Once these get pinned, I will sew them one right after the other. You can continue to chain piece until the end. So what I'll do is I will take these first two blocks together, bring them back, and then pair them with the last block in each row. So at the end of this, we will have 4 finished sewn rows. With all of my rows finally sewn, now we get to start sewing them together. My last tip is to continue your chain piecing here, even with multiple rows. So what that means is I will take my top row, flip it right sides together with the row below it, and then I'm going to take my middle row and flip it right sides together with my bottom row. This ends up saving you a lot of time. Even though it's only 2 seams that you're going to be sewing, you're doing them one right after the other so that you can chain piece and kind of assembly line this process. Now, the other thing to mention is that your final seam will end up being less bulky, which is really helpful. We're going to be sewing the top half and the bottom half together in our final seam. And if I was trying to shove this entire quilt row by row into my sewing machine, it can be a little bit more tedious and you can end up with a lot of space. I don't know about you, but I have a really small sewing studio, and so I don't have the space to be able to sew an entire massive quilt in my tiny little room. So we're also making sure that your final seam will be the least bulky. Now, the last tip that I have for you is intersections. I'm going to take my top row. I am going to put it right sides together with the one directly below it. And what I mean is I want to make sure that the intersections for my Sawtooth Star block and my 9-patch block match up. So those are going to be the most important areas that you pin when you're doing your seams here, when you're sewing rows together. You want to make sure that the intersections of your blocks end up nice and crisp. So I'm going to go ahead and take these to the sewing machine, and then we will talk about our final seam. My final seam here is going to be sewing my top half to my bottom half. So the last seam will be this one right here. Don't forget to check your intersections and pin those to make sure that your blocks all line up into perfect points. And there we have it, one finished quilt top. As you can see, this process is easy, it's really fun, and the end result is so exciting. You end up with a completely finished quilt top. I can't wait to see all of your creations, so don't forget to tag us on social media so that I can take a look at all of your quilt tops.